300 years ago, the galaxy voted to seal Earth off from the stars. They called it quarantine. They said it was for our own protection. They never told us it wasn't. Above the pale gray face of Earth's moon, space tore open in a silent flash of light, and the Kaldari Empire's flagship, the Phyrexian's Glory, slid out of warp like a blade drawn from its sheath. Its hull stretched nearly 2 kilometers, bristling with weapons arrays that had conquered a dozen star systems. On its bridge, Overlord Threxval leaned back in his command chair and smiled at the sensor readout in front of him. Earth's fleet, what little of it existed, looked like toys. Scattered patrol ships, outdated satellites. A civilization the Concord had literally locked away for 3 centuries because it was too primitive, too dangerous to itself, too pathetic to matter. Send the welcome signal. Threxval said, his voice thick with amusement. Let the strays know their masters have arrived. Then his ship's AI spoke, and the smile vanished from his face. Every vessel in the Kaldari fleet, all 6 of them, had just been flagged. Marked, targeted, not by Earth's patrol ships, not by any weapon system that the Concord's intelligence division had ever logged. The targeting signature came from something ancient, something buried, something that had been sleeping in the crust of the planet below for longer than the Kaldari Empire had existed. Threxval stood up so fast his chair spun behind him. Identify that system. Now! His tactical officer's hands trembled over the console. Sir, I can't. It's not in any database. It's not Concord tech. It's not even close. 200 kilometers below them, in a glass-wall command center outside Geneva, Commander Elena Vasquez watched the same alert bloom across her own screen and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had spent 6 years in Space Force intelligence, and she had never seen this system active. Not once. Not in a single drill, a single briefing. A single classified file she fought to get clearance for. Sir, her communications officer said quietly, Orbital Defense Grid is reporting active status. That grid hasn't run in 300 years, Elena said. It's running now. Elena Vasquez was 38 years old, sharp-eyed, quick-tongued, and deeply allergic to nonsense, which made her uniquely unqualified, in the Concord's opinion, to be humanity's official liaison. That was exactly why they'd picked her, unthreatening. The internal memo had called her, a calculated insult dressed up as a diplomatic assignment. She'd read that memo herself, courtesy of a friend in translation services, and she'd laughed out loud alone in her apartment, because what else was there to do? Now she stood in a command center with her hands braced on a console, watching Earth's oldest secret wake up in real time, and she understood, with sudden and terrible clarity, that nobody currently alive on this planet actually knew what that secret was. Beside her, Dr. Marcus Webb was already running, tablet clutched to his chest, gray hair wild, muttering to himself the way he always did when the universe stopped making sense. Webb was a Concord's least favorite kind of human, a xeno-archivist who refused to believe the official story. For years he had pored over corrupted pre-quarantine records, insisting that the tale everyone accepted, that humanity had been locked away after some catastrophic failed first contact, didn't add up. Too clean, too convenient, too many redacted names. Elena, he said breathless, I need you to see something. Right now. Marcus, we have an alien fleet parked over our moon. I know. I think I know why they're really here. He turned his tablet toward her. On the screen, buried inside a corrupted data core pulled from beneath Antarctic ice 2 weeks earlier, was a single classified heading, half destroyed by time. 3 words that meant nothing and everything at once. Directive Sable, do not wake. Elena stared at it. Then she looked up, through the reinforced glass, toward the sky, where somewhere far above them, an alien warlord was staring down at a planet he'd been told was harmless. Marcus, she said slowly, I don't think we were quarantined to keep something out. She looked back at the screen, at those 3 words, at the quiet, patient dread of them. I think we were quarantined to keep something in. The fleet above the moon did not fire. It did not move. For 6 hours, the Phyrexian's Glory and its 5 escort ships hung in silence, while somewhere in its depths, Overlord Threxval argued with his own war council about a targeting system that shouldn't exist. And then, just as quietly as it had woken, Earth's ancient grid went dark again. No explanation. No warning. It simply stopped, like a predator deciding the moment wasn't worth the effort. 3 days later, humanity was formally invited to join the interstellar Concord. The timing was not lost on Elena Vasquez. She sat in the back of shuttle bound for Concord Station Meridian, watching Earth shrink behind her through the viewport, and try not to think about the fact that 6 months ago, nobody in this galaxy had officially known her planet existed. Now she was humanity's chosen face to the stars, an honor that felt more and more like being handed a leash and told to smile for the cameras. The story the Concord told was simple enough to fit on a single briefing slide. 280 years ago, in the earliest days of humanity's first tentative steps into orbit, a failed first contact incident had occurred, one so catastrophic, so destabilizing, that the newly formed Concord had unanimously voted to seal Earth away for its own protection and everyone else's. No records of the incident survived. No witnesses remained. Just the outcome, a locked door and 300 years of silence. Elena had asked more than once for details. She always got the same answer. Classified. Lost. Above your clearance. Dr. Marcus Webb had asked the same question for 15 years, and he'd stopped believing the answer a long time ago. Look at this, he'd told her, back in Geneva, spreading 3 decades of research across a table like a man laying out evidence at a murder trial. Every single Concord species voted for quarantine. Every one. Species that were at war with each other for centuries. Species that couldn't agree on the color of the sky. All voted the same way. Unanimously on the same day. You don't get unanimous votes from a coalition like that unless everyone is afraid of the exact same thing. Elena hadn't had an answer for that. She still didn't. Concord Station Meridian was a marvel, a ring of gleaming alloy and living light, suspended in the void, home to ambassadors from 41 species. Elena walked its corridors in her Space Force dress uniform, aware of every eye that turned to look at her. The curiosity, the pity, and in more than a few cases, the open contempt. Overlord Threxval made no effort to hide his. At the welcoming summit, in a chamber shaped like an amphitheater with alien dignitaries seated in rising rings above her, Threxval rose from his seat before Elena had finished her opening remarks and interrupted her mid-sentence, his translator crackling with amusement. "Forgive me, Commander," he said, letting the word commander drip with condescension, "but perhaps humanity should reconsider its priorities. You arrive here with no fleet worth mentioning, no advanced technology, no meaningful contribution to Concord, and yet you stand before us asking for equal standing. The galaxy did not quarantine you because you were dangerous. It quarantined you because you were an embarrassment it wished to forget." Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber. Not everyone laughed. Elena noticed that, filed it away the way she filed away everything. She did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. With respect, Overlord, she said, "If we were such an embarrassment, I wonder why your entire fleet went quiet for 6 hours the moment you arrived at our door." The chamber went still. Threxval's translator did not carry a tone for what crossed his face, but Elena didn't need one to read it. That night, back in her quarters, General Amara Cole reached her on a secure channel, her weathered face lit by the blue glow of the console. Cole had been Elena's mentor since flight school, one of the last officers alive who'd held real clearance during the final years before the quarantine was lifted. "You made an enemy today," Cole said. "I made a point." With Threxval, those are the same thing. Cole's expression softened, just slightly, the way it did when she was about to say something she didn't want to say. "Elena, listen to me carefully. Some doors were locked for a reason. You are about to knock on one, and I am not sure anyone left alive knows what's standing on the other side." Elena leaned forward. "Then help me find out." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I can't," she finally said, "but Marcus can. Just be careful what he finds. Commander, some truths were buried because they saved us, and some were buried because they still could destroy us." The message from General Cole stayed with Elena long after the channel went dark, sitting in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow or spit out. Some truths were buried because they saved us, and some were buried because they still could destroy us. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she pulled up every file she had clearance for, and several she didn't, and started reading. 3 days later, Marcus Webb called her at 2 in the morning, station time. His voice tight with something between excitement and fear. "I need you in the archive wing," he said. "Now. Alone." She found him in a windowless research pod deep in Meridian Station's lower ring, surrounded by holographic fragments of corrupted data. The recovered Antarctic core spinning slowly in the air between them like a captured star. His hands were shaking, and Marcus Webb's hands never shook. "Talk to me," Elena said. "The core isn't just damaged," he said. "It was deliberately fragmented. Someone tried to destroy this record 300 years ago and didn't finish the job. I've spent 2 years rebuilding maybe 40% of it." He pulled up a section of scrolling text, alien in structure, but unmistakably referencing Earth. "This isn't a record of a failed first contact. Elena, there's no incident here. No disaster. No war. What I'm looking at is a treaty." "A treaty with who?" Marcus hesitated. The way he always did right before he said something that would change everything. "With something the Concord doesn't have a name for. Just a designation. The requesting party." He looked up at her. "Every species that voted for the quarantine wasn't voting to protect themselves from us. They were honoring a request. Someone asked them to seal Earth away, and every single empire in the galaxy, empires who hated each other, who'd been at war for 1,000 years, agreed without argument." Elena felt the cold return to her stomach. "Who has that kind of authority?" "I don't know, but whoever it was, they left something behind." He gestured, and a new fragment bloomed in the air, a schematic buried so deep in the corrupted data that Elena almost missed the significance of it. A structure, vast, built into Earth's crust itself, threading through tectonic plates like roots through soil. "This is what woke up when Threxval's fleet arrived. This is Directive Sable." "What is it?" "I think it's a Guardian system. Old. Older than the Concord itself. Maybe. And I think it's the reason nobody has ever successfully invaded Earth, even during the centuries when our own defenses were nothing but rifles and prayer." Elena stared at the schematic, at the impossible scale of it, and felt the shape of something enormous and unspoken pressing against the edges of her understanding. "Marcus, why would something that powerful let humanity walk around defenseless for 300 years, and then wake up the second an alien fleet shows up?" "That's the part that scares me," Marcus said quietly. "I don't think it wakes up for threats. I think it wakes up for someone specific." He pulled up one final fragment, badly damaged, a string of genetic markers half-eaten by corruption. "This is a trigger sequence, a bloodline lock. And Elena, I cross-referenced it against the Space Forces personnel database, against every officer with any connection to pre-quarantine military families." His voice dropped. "There are only 6 matching sequences on the entire planet. You're one of them." The room seemed to tilt around her. "That's not possible." "Your great-great-grandmother," Marcus said gently, "General Rosa Vasquez, served in the final years before the quarantine sealed. Her personnel file is one of the most heavily redacted documents I've ever encountered. I think she knew what Directive Sable was. I think she was part of building it or protecting it or both." Elena sat down hard in the chair behind her, her mind racing back through every strange thing that had happened since she'd arrived at Meridian. The Concord hadn't chosen her as liaison because she was unthreatening. They'd chosen her because someone, somewhere, had run the same genetic analysis Marcus just had, and realized that the woman standing in that summit chamber wasn't just a diplomat. She was a key, walking willingly into the hands of the people who wanted to steal the lock she opened. "Marcus," she said slowly, "who else has seen this data?" He didn't answer right away, and that silence told her everything she needed to know before he finally spoke. "That's the other thing," he said. "Someone tried to access this file 40 minutes ago, from inside Concord Station Meridian." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The holographic schematic of Directive Sable hung between them, glowing faintly in the dark of the research pod, and Elena felt the full weight of what Marcus had just told her settle over the room like a hell breath. "Trace it," she said. Marcus's fingers moved fast across the console, pulling up access logs, cross-referencing station IDs. His earlier fear now sharpened into something more focused. "It's routed through 6 proxy relays. Whoever did this knew exactly how to hide their tracks." He paused, and his face went pale. Elena, the final relay traces back to Kaldari diplomatic wing. Threxval, or someone working for him. This wasn't a random breach. Someone inside the Kaldari Empire already suspected what you are, and now they know for certain. Elena stood up, forcing her voice steady even as her pulse hammered against her ribs. Then we're out of time. If they know I'm a trigger for Directive Sable, they're not going to wait for diplomacy to run its course. She was right, though it took 2 more days for the shape of the danger to fully reveal itself. The summons came disguised as an honor. Overlord Threxval requested Commander Vasquez's presence at a private reception aboard the Phrexen's Glory, framed publicly as a gesture of goodwill following their earlier disagreement. Elena knew better than to believe it, but she also knew that refusing would look like weakness, and weakness was the one thing she couldn't afford to show the Kaldari Empire right now. Ambassador Sonari, a diplomat from the neutral Sonari collective who had watched the summit exchange with quiet, unreadable eyes, intercepted her in the corridor before she boarded the shuttle. "You should not go alone," Sonari said, her long fingers folding together in the gesture her species used for concern. Threxval does not offer goodwill. He offers leverage disguised as courtesy. "I don't have a choice," Elena said. "If I refuse, he'll know I'm afraid. If I go, at least I control what he sees." Sonari studied her for a long moment. "There's a third option, Commander. You could tell him the truth before he takes it from you." When Elena said nothing, the ambassador continued, quieter now. "My people remember fragments of the original quarantine vote. We were young then, barely part of the Concord. I remember the fear in that chamber. It was not fear of your species being dangerous. It was fear of what would happen if your species were provoked." She held Elena's gaze. "Be careful what you provoke, Commander." Aboard the Phrexen's Glory, the reception hall gleamed with cold Kaldari elegance, all sharp angles and captured starlight, and Threxval received her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Commander Vasquez, I trust Concord hospitality has treated you well." "Well enough," Elena said, "though I imagine you didn't invite me here for the wine." Threxval's smile widened, and this time it did reach his eyes, sharp and hungry, direct. "I appreciate that in a species otherwise so unremarkable." He gestured, and a hologram bloomed above the table between them. And Elena's stomach dropped as she recognized the genetic sequence Marcus had shown her 3 days earlier, now sitting in Kaldari hands. Fully decoded. "Your ancestors built something extraordinary, Commander. Something my empire has spent 200 years trying to reverse engineer from fragments and ruins scattered across a dozen dead worlds. And it turns out the completed masterpiece was never in the ruins at all. It was buried beneath your feet the entire time, guarded by nothing more than a lock woven into your blood." "If you already know all that," Elena said, forcing calm into her voice while her mind raced, "then you know I can't give you what you want." "Can't or won't." Threxval leaned forward. "Let me be generous, Commander, since generosity costs me nothing. Cooperate. Walk me and my engineers onto that platform yourself. And Earth remains protected, valued member of the Concord, celebrated as the birthplace of the greatest technology this galaxy has ever known. Refuse, and I promise you, my fleet will find another way in. The only difference will be how many of your people are still breathing when we do." Elena's blood went cold, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "You spent 200 years chasing something you don't understand. Overlord, ancient tech, ripped from dead worlds, cobbled together into weapons you can't fully explain. Maybe you should ask yourself why an empire as powerful as yours still needs to steal." Something flickered across Threxval's face, gone in an instant, but Elena had spent her whole career reading rooms, reading people, and she recognized it instantly. It wasn't anger. It was fear. The flicker lasted less than a second, but Elena had built her entire career on reading exactly that kind of second. Threxval recovered fast, smoothing his expression back into cold amusement. But the moment stayed with her long after she left the Phrexen's Glory, replaying in her mind like a splinter she couldn't stop touching. An empire with the most feared fleet in the Concord, an empire that mocked humanity's weakness at every turn, had just shown fear to mention where its own power came from. She brought it straight to Marcus. "He's hiding something bigger than just wanting the tech," she told him, pacing the research pod while he worked. Marcus, I need you to dig into Kaldari fleet records, not the public specs. The actual engineering origin of their capital ships. It took him 11 hours, and when he finally looked up from his console, his face had the particular stillness of a man who just found something he wished he hadn't. Elena, he said slowly, the Kaldari Empire's entire modern fleet, the ships that conquered a dozen systems, that built their reputation as a Concord's dominant military power, none of it is original Kaldari engineering. The core drive systems, the weapons arrays, even their targeting architecture, it's all reverse engineered from precursor ruins, the same ruins Directive Sable was built to guard. So the Kaldari Empire's entire military strength is built on stolen technology. Stolen and incomplete, Marcus said. Fragments, guesses, patchwork solutions filling gaps they never fully understood. That's why they need Earth's systems so badly. It's not just about having more power. It's about finally understanding the power they've been faking mastery over for 2 centuries. He hesitated. And if the rest of the Concord ever found out the Empire that's been lecturing everyone about strength and superiority for 200 years actually built its entire legacy on borrowed scraps it doesn't understand, then Threxval loses everything, Elena finished. His Empire's whole identity collapses. That was when General Cole reached out again, her face grim on the secure channel, older and more tired than Elena had ever seen her. Elena, I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago. She paused, choosing her words with visible difficulty. Your great-great-grandmother didn't just help build Directive Sable. She was the last person alive who understood what it actually is. Before she died, she left instructions, passed down quietly through 4 generations of our family, military family to military family, waiting for someone with a bloodline and a position to need them. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because the instructions only make sense once you understand what's at stake, and I didn't think you'd understand it until now. Cole took a breath. Directive Sable isn't a weapon, Elena. It's a guardian, built by a species that vanished before the Concord even existed, and it doesn't respond to force or command codes or fear. Your ancestors' notes say it responds to one thing only, intent. It has to believe, truly believe, that the person standing on that platform means to protect, not to conquer. Elena felt the weight of that settle into her bones. So if the Kaldari force their way in, it won't matter whose blood carries the trigger, Cole said. If Threxval or anyone under his command stands on that platform intending to take, the system won't open for them, no matter what genetic key they're holding. But if they force you onto that platform against your will, using you as a tool instead of trusting you as a guardian. She let the sentence hang unfinished, because they both understood what it meant. 3 days later, the answer came anyway. A Concord-wide alert exploded across every channel simultaneously. Kaldari warships, far more than the 6 that had first arrived, were moving toward Earth in formation, no longer disguised as an escort, no longer pretending at diplomacy. Threxval had stopped waiting for permission. Elena watched the fleet numbers climb on the tactical display in the Meridian Command Center, her hand steady even as her heart pounded, and understood with sudden clarity that Threxval wasn't gambling on stealth or persuasion anymore. He was gambling on brute force, on dragging her to that platform in chains if he had to, betting that raw power could override whatever ancient rule her ancestor had left behind. She looked at Marcus, at the fear plain on his face, and made her decision. "Get me a ship," she said. "I'm going home." The shuttle ride back to Earth felt longer than any flight Elena had ever taken, though the distance was the same as it had always been. She sat alone in the cramped passenger bay, Marcus beside her running calculations he already knew the answer to, and watched the blue curve of her planet grow larger through the viewport, wondering if she was flying home to save it or hand it over. By the time they broke atmosphere, the sky over the eastern seaboard was already full of warnings. Kaldari warships, 11 of them now, hung in high orbit in a slow, deliberate formation, close enough to see from the ground with the naked eye at dusk, an alien fleet visible above American skies for the first time in human history. Global emergency broadcasts had already started, cutting between panic and disbelief, and Elena landed at a blacked-out Space Force installation outside Geneva to find General Cole waiting on the tarmac, older and grimmer than she'd ever seen her. "They're demanding you by name," Cole said, walking fast beside her toward the command bunker. Threxval's message came in an hour ago. Surrender yourself to Kaldari custody, or he opens fire on population centers until you do. Then I go to him. Elena. No. Elena stopped walking, turned to face her mentor, and for the first time let some of the fear she'd been carrying show plainly on her face. If I run, if I hide, he still wins. He drags us out until he finds another way onto that platform, and next time it might not be me standing there to refuse him. I need to face this directly, on our terms, not his. Cole studied her for a long moment, then reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, worn data drive, the metal casing scratched with age. Your great-great-grandmother's final instructions, full and unredacted. I was authorized to give them to you the moment you needed them. She pressed it into Elena's hand. You need them now. Elena read them alone, in a small gray room beneath the bunker, with Marcus standing silent guard outside the door. Rosa Vasquez's words, translated from handwritten notes into digital record decades ago, were plain and unadorned, a soldier's voice speaking across 3 centuries. Directive Sable does not belong to any government, and it does not answer to command rank. It was left by a species who understood something our galaxy has forgotten. That power without restraint destroys everything it touches, including the one who wields it. The Guardian was built to protect Earth from that mistake, and to protect the galaxy from us making it too. It will not open for conquest, even if conquest wears human skin. It opens only for someone willing to stand unarmed and offer themselves first. Elena closed her eyes, understanding now exactly what her ancestor was asking of her, and exactly what it would cost. She walked out into the blacked-out streets of Geneva alone that evening, no escort, no weapon, dressed in her plain Space Force uniform, and stood in an open field outside the city as the Kaldari flagship's shuttle descended to meet her, its running lights cutting harsh white lines through the dark. Threxval himself stepped out, flanked by armed Kaldari soldiers, his earlier amusement long gone, replaced now by something colder and more desperate. You came alone, he said, surprised despite himself. I told you once that your empire needs to ask itself why it still needs to steal, Elena said, her voice steady in the cold night air. I'm here to give you your answer, overlord, not as a hostage, as a guardian. Then guard nothing, Threxval snapped, gesturing his soldiers forward. Walk to the platform, commander, and open the door, or watch your cities burn one by one until you do. They marched her at gunpoint through the dark, down into the hidden entrance Marcus's research had finally located weeks earlier, a vast chamber carved into ancient bedrock far beneath the surface, walls lined with technology that predated every empire in the Concord combined. At its center stood a raised platform, silent and dark, waiting. Elena stepped onto it. Kaldari rifles trained on her back, and felt the old system stir beneath her feet, ancient and vast and listening. Threxval's voice cracked through the chamber, impatient, triumphant. Open it. Elena closed her eyes, remembering her ancestors' words, and did the only thing Rosa Vasquez's notes had ever asked of her. She let go of every ounce of fear, every instinct to fight or flee, and simply told the truth. I'm not here to hand you a weapon, she said quietly, to the platform, to the dark, to whatever ancient intelligence was listening far beneath her feet. I'm here to protect what's mine. All of it, even from him. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the entire chamber began to glow. The light rose slowly at first, a pale gold spreading up to the bedrock walls like dawn breaking underground, and Elena felt it before she understood it. A vast, ancient awareness settling around her, not hostile, not cold, but weighing her exactly the way her ancestors' notes had promised. Threxval's soldiers took an uneasy step back. Threxval did not. His eyes were fixed on the light with the desperate hunger of a man who had spent his entire career chasing this exact moment. Yes, he whispered. Yes, finally. The system did not open for him. Instead, the light surged outward, racing up the chamber walls, through solid rock, through 300 years of silence, and erupted across the surface of the planet in a wave no human instrument had ever recorded. Above Geneva, above every city on Earth, the sky itself seemed to shimmer for half a second, and then, high above the atmosphere, 11 Kaldari warships felt something impossible happen at once. Aboard the Threxon's Glory, left in orbit under a skeleton command crew, alarms shattered the silence as every system the ship depended on. Its drive core, its weapons arrays, its shielding began failing in cascading waves, not destroyed, but stripped, unraveled down to the raw, borrowed precursor architecture beneath 2 centuries of Kaldari engineering. For the first time, the Empire's own soldiers were staring at what their technology had actually been underneath the paint. Ancient, foreign, incomplete, and never truly theirs. Back in the underground chamber, Threxval staggered as the reports reached him through his comlink, his triumphant expression collapsing into disbelief, then fury, then something closer to fear. "What did you do?" he snarled at Elena, rifle rising in his own shaking hand. "What did you do?" "I told the truth," Elena said quietly, and it recognized a lie the second it heard one. He didn't fire. Somewhere behind the rage in his eyes, even Threxval understood that pulling that trigger now would answer every question the rest of the galaxy was about to ask, live, in front of every allied species watching their fleet's readings crash across shared Concord channels in real time. By the time Concord ambassadors from a dozen systems convened an emergency session 2 days later, the truth had already outrun every attempt to contain it. Sonari stood before the council chamber, her voice steady, and laid out what Marcus's research and Elena's testimony had confirmed. The Kaldari Empire's entire military supremacy, the fear it built its identity on for 200 years, had been assembled from stolen, half-understood precursor salvage, propped up by the very ruins it once mocked a primitive Earth for guarding. Overlord Threxval stood alone in that chamber, stripped of the one thing his empire had always traded on, the illusion of earned strength. Elena did not gloat. She stood before the same council that had laughed at her months earlier and spoke plainly. "You quarantined my planet for 300 years, afraid of what we might become. You should have been asking what kind of galaxy you were building instead, one where the strongest empire's throne was built on someone else's bones." She let that sit in the silence of the chamber. Earth isn't interested in taking anyone's place at the top. We're interested in a Concord that doesn't need to lie to stay there. In the weeks that followed, the balance of power across a dozen star systems began quietly, irreversibly shifting. Species that had once deferred to Kaldari's strength started asking harder questions. Sonari's collective, sensing the moment, proposed a new framework for Concord membership, one built on transparency rather than fear. And Earth, the planet the galaxy had once been terrified enough to lock away for 3 centuries, found itself, for the first time, being asked to help write the rules instead of simply follow them. Elena stood on the observation deck of Meridian Station months later, watching Allied ships, some of the very same species who had once mocked her at that first summit, requesting formal clearance to visit Earth, not as conquerors, not as rescuers, but as guests. Marcus joined her at the viewport, quiet for once, watching the same view. "Your great-great-grandmother would be proud," he said. Elena thought of Rosa Vasquez's handwritten words, of a guardian built to answer intent rather than force, of an empire that had spent 2 centuries mistaking theft for strength. "They spent 300 years afraid of what Earth might become," she said softly, watching her home turn slowly below them, blue and steady and finally, truly free. "They should have been afraid of what Earth already was."